Hey everyone, we're back. Today we have two distinguished gentlemen, and we are going to be chatting about the elusive God of the Bible, Yahweh, Allah, and Jesus. I would like to start by introducing to you Neal Sendlak. Hello, Neal. How are you?
What's going on, everybody? Welcome. You're about to attain true gnosis.
Followed by Derek. Hello, Derek. How's it going?
Great, man. Thanks for having me on, and Neil.
I would like to start by telling people that in the description of this particular video, there are the links of both Neal's and Derek's channels. These are fantastic channels, guys, because they introduce academics and very difficult subjects, usually difficult subjects, but the line of questioning by both Neal and Derek bring very complicated subjects down to earth. Make it very, very simple, make it interesting, a bit of cheeky fun, and not as boring as a lecture that you would get from the usual academic. I mean, Robert Price, I love Robert Price, but you guys have changed him into I don't know. He's the sense of humor, the cheek. It's brilliant.
He's the best. He's the best. That's Derek's boy. That's Derek's boy.
Well, I mean, Neal is like
I'm just glad to know him. That's all.
You're like my brother, though. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, man. That's
good.
That's true.
Yeah.
So I want to start by, we'll start from the top from Neal. If you tell us a little bit about your background and what's your channel is kind of youngish.
Yeah.
Tell us about what you're trying to achieve.
So I had a normal background. I grew up Catholic, actually. Got confirmed. As soon as I got confirmed, turned my back on that thing, took the money and ran, basically. But had a strange up and down life where I got in trouble a lot. I actually, struggled with mental health and substance abuse for a while. So that actually led me into going to being incarcerated for a while. While I was incarcerated, I read the Bible front to back, became a fundamentalist Christian, basically while I was there, and thought everything in there was true. Started jumping around from church to church, and long story short, I started to really wanted to study and understand. Basically, I wanted to prove to everybody why my religion is true. I'm going to show everybody. I'm going to be a detective, and I'm going to prove everybody why this is real. So long story short, I hit the books, started learning about philosophy and history and mythology, comparative religion. And I started to really unpack my own worldview and understanding of religion and Christianity. And it got to the point where I knew something wasn't right here. And so I left fundamentalist Christianity for Gnosticism because, Gnosticism seemed like to explain the world better. It seemed to explain why there's this dualistic good and evil, and there's this God that just wants to be worshipped, and he must be an evil deity. And so I jumped into Gnosticism out of all things, and that didn't really last that long. But it did cause me to want to start a YouTube channel to tell on my old self of why I was wrong. So I call the channel Gnostic Informant because an informant tells on themselves. So that's what happened. I started the channel. I met Derek. Derek started introducing me to people like Dr. Price, like I'm David Letwa. He's helping me out, dude. He's shouting me out. He's giving me all types of publicity that I never would have had. Dude, Derek, I owe my life to Derek right now. But that's what happened. That's how my channel started. And I, like you said, I just try to ask questions like I'm not smart or anything. I get smart people and I ask questions, normal questions, like a dummy that I am. And they're layman level, entry level questions, but I try to put everything together into one spot so we could see everything better, right? So I'm not saying my audience is dumb or anything, but I'm saying like I like to make things easier to digest, like you said. And I really appreciate that you noticed that about me. But that's my channel. It's youtube.com/Gnostic Informant.
Yeah, guys, it's in the description of this video, and it's you're encouraged to have a look because the fantastic work you've got different disciplines. You've got people from debunking mythologies, even astrology. It's not just only religion. It's cults. It's all sort of things. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Mm.
How about you, Derek? I mean, Derek, you're a little bit more seasoned by now.
A little bit, I guess. You know, I don't know. What were you wanting to know?
Sort of very similar to Neal's background. When did it start? And what are you trying? Maybe 2022. I think your channel is about a couple of years old now, maybe a year and a half.
Yeah.
What do you reckon?
I think
So
a little over 2 years, something like that.
we're only a few days ago to go for a brand new year. Do you have any new changes you want to apply to your channel?
More Islam. I'm going to be dealing with that academically and as well with people who've left it. So Islam's coming into the mix more. I also am going to try. It takes time to find academics who are critical to delve into Hinduism and things like that. But a brief background is there's people in your life you meet that you realize are authentic, and you meet them and you're like, that's a real person. Like, you could tell that they're just true to themselves. No matter what they believe, I don't care. They're true to themselves. You can tell when some real people are those. And if I'm going to brag about me, I know what I am. I don't care who you are, what you think I am. I don't care. I know how authentic I am about trying to figure this stuff out and really wanting to get to the answers. When I was a young kid, I prayed these prayers. God, wherever I go, whatever I do, I don't care how painful, I don't care what it is, lead me to the truth. Guide me with wisdom, show me the way, show me the truth. And I'd always say, though, but bring me back to you. Always bring me back to you, but bring me back to you. Well, isn't it kind of a coincidence that as a young man, I would never have thought that the truth would have actually led me away from what I thought God to be and brought me closer to myself, which ultimately being I was the one carrying myself in the sand when you saw the footprints. I was the one who got myself clean off heroin. It was me. And of course, don't get me wrong, it wasn't just me. It was the social structure, the environment, my family, my friends, people who were there to support me, encourage me, and uplift me with the positivity, etc. So my background in Christianity briefly is I started off by going to church with my mom bribing me to go to a fast food restaurant or a little all-you-can-eat buffet if I went to church at a Baptist church. She was raised Pentecostal. Dad was a Catholic, Roman Catholic. I started to get actually myself involved in Christianity at a house church with a woman pastor, a KJV onlyist. We spoke in tongues. We prophesied. We laid on of hands. We were ridiculous. Yep. Rolling on the floor, singing. I mean, like over the top. And we really meant it. We weren't being phonies.
Right.
We absolutely believed in what we were saying and what we were doing. And years go by. You have a girlfriend or two. You have a few beers. You smoked something you never smoked before in your life. And real life hits you. And you want to try and come back to Jesus to get your life back in order. And when you do that, you find out there are other people who have different ideas about Jesus than what you were taught in this small little house church that told you line upon line and precept upon precept. You know what I'm talking about, Neal. Yeah. So our church has the truth, and they would warn us, don't go to these other ones. They're not teaching line upon line, precept upon precept. The Holy Ghost ain't in it. The whole nine, man. We spoke in tongues. If you didn't have the Holy Spirit, you didn't speak in tongues. If you had the Holy Spirit, you spoke in tongues. It was that kind of cult. And years go by. I want to know more about my religion and know more about Jesus. And I got to skip ahead and just say, I went through many phases of Christianity.
Me too.
And as I started to get through the final points of these phases, I came across that movie Zeitgeist. And as much as that movie is not 100% accurate, it made Jesus step down off his number one pedestal in my mind on an even playing field with Krishna, Buddha, every other deity in history, and realizing why. I actually could ask a question. I didn't have the answer, but I was able to sincerely ask the question to myself. I don't care what the world says. Why do I think Jesus is really the true one and everyone else is wrong? I used to say the answer when I was in No Apologetics. I used to give the answer, but I was never really able to ask myself sincerely an honest question with no one else around but me and say, Derek, could you really be wrong? And accept that maybe I am. And I was willing to start. That kernel of doubt is what started me on the journey and led me to MythVision.
Wow.
It's really interesting because what you just said, you can take away the word Christianity and add Islam, and it will be exactly the same.
Right.
It's exactly the same phases. You know, they go through the different versions of Islam. For some reason, every single message from that particular God was never clear enough that you end up being sort of understanding in different ways. Doesn't matter what religion. You know, Judaism has many different sects. Islam's the same. Christianity is, you know, notorious for it. We're talking thousands of interpretations, but it makes you wonder. And I've always wondered. God chooses the worst possible mean of communication with humanity and gives the devil the best possible way. The devil can speak to you in your own head, in your own accent, dialect, the lingo of the era that you're born in, and speak directly into you via full download. But God will choose the worst possible way of communicating with people through a certain language frozen in time, because most of the, you know, if you read, Arabic speaking people cannot understand most of the Quran because it's ancient Arabic. It's very difficult to understand. And words are ambiguous. One word can mean 15 different things. And it's such an inferior way of communicating with people. Muslims believe that the Torah and the Bible have changed throughout the time, and people have changed it deliberately. But for some strange reason, God insists on using the exact same method, even though he knew that previously his word has been changed. Why couldn't he figure a different way of communicating? A very, very strange, stubborn God, I might add.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I want to jump in real quick, go back to something that Derek was talking about, because the interesting part about all of this is, like, it all comes back to the individual, and it's all relative to their understanding and their worldview. And what I'm saying, and I'll talk about myself. I'm not going to talk about anyone else. Is that, you know, when you're saved, Derek, you know what I'm talking about, right? When you're saved,
Yeah, oh yeah,
you
yeah.
talk about it with your friends at church, and you talk about how you know what saved is and how other Christians don't know what saved is. But I'm saved. I felt the Holy Spirit. This is different. I'll never ever go back to being an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
And, like,
Well, I was never one to begin with, but yeah.
right. And it's like, it's like the fact that you can be at that level of understanding of yourself and then sort of like change so much just from letting go of trying to be right and trying to fit the square into a triangle hole of whatever your worldview is. Once you just say, all right, I got to let go. Let's see what the experts say, or let's whatever. Once it's like this weight is lifted off your shoulders, and you go from, it's funny because you think that you were saved before, but the feeling of admitting that you were wrong is so much more. There's more freedom that comes from it, if that makes sense. It's just ironic. It really is ironic.
The very funny thing is you can get the exact same feeling through a secular method. You can be in a football game and your team is winning and everybody's chanting, and your team has not won the cup for like 20 years, and finally you're about to make it, and everybody's standing in tears and holding hands. You can get this in a Pink Floyd concert or a Metallica. You can get this.
Yeah,
it doesn't have to even better sometimes.
Or psychedelics. People use psychedelics. I mean, to each his own, but that's there's a lot of ways to achieve this sort of uplifting, I don't know if you want to call it spiritual awakening, but like there's something there. And it, like you said, music, even just being in love with somebody, there's all these different, it's all emotional, it's all feelings based.
If you notice a lot of the modern Christian music, they use language that's interchangeable with your relationship with a spouse or something like that. And I've noticed that. I've been confused sometimes. I'll be like, what are they doing? All they're doing is using the common psychological, known, natural themes that we all run with, you know, the loved one, our spouse, or our children, or parent. And they run with these same motifs. They get it from the Bible, but they also get it from common sense, looking around at all the successful love songs that are out there. Whitney Houston, I Will Always Love You. I mean, Who doesn't love that song? Everyone knows that song, at least, even if you don't listen to it. Everyone knows that song, and they hear it and they know, there's Whitney Houston singing it. People will attribute that to God, and they'll talk about, I will always love you. And it's like, oh, okay. So this is, it's just common stuff. You're right about the whole weight being lifted, though. I felt a lot of freedom. For me, I always had this pride about being right when I believed. It's like, it's tribalism. My God is true. My God is right. And when I realized that I wasn't really sure about that with honesty, once you know you don't know, when you're actually realizing you don't have that answer, you're making excuses up. For example, well, the Quran has been preserved since Uthman forward, and it's just a small step to think that from Uthman to Muhammad that this is actually the exact dot for dot exact words of the mouth of the prophet. Why the prophet didn't want to actually collect the Quran during his own life, why he didn't have that in his mind, that's a whole nother question. But the point is you look at that and you go, okay, that's your excuse for somehow saying this proves this is from God. Human effort on trying to sustain a tradition is evidence of God? Or making a vague claim that one day we will build really tall buildings, and therefore now in Dubai, they have the tallest building in the world. Well, I hope, just for the sake of it, that China builds a building taller than that building, just to show, like, well, human effort, here you go again. You're going to have to outdo that building to prove your prophecy is true. I mean, it's ridiculous. At the end of the day, we keep bolstering whatever claim we can to keep our sacred held belief that we are emotionally tied into, psychologically tied into, traditionally tied into, and we believed it from birth, not because we know it's true. Our experience validates that. We somehow think the experience coupled with the idea makes it true. Why do you think a Muslim, a Christian, and a Jew can all stand in the room and all think they are right and really know that the other one is wrong? Everyone knows everyone else is wrong except them.
Right. It's crazy. It's really crazy. It really is.
So once I think we all agree now, emotions is a sort of the shield that shields you from the truth. But once you neutralize yourself, even for a week, you're going to say, okay, for a week, I'm going to eliminate my emotions, and I'm going to approach this a bit objectively. I'm going to engage in academics, and I'm going to start to read about my God from outside sources. What the guys outside of my inner circle, the circle of trust, would say about my God. And you end up with this strange scenario. And I'm going to start from 300,000 years ago, which is basically the first or the oldest Homo sapien found in Morocco. It used to be 150 to 200, according to Stephen Jay Gould, Dawkins. These are the sort of estimates. But 300, I think a couple of years ago, we found the remains of a Homo sapien, which is our species right now, in Morocco. So we know we can go up to 300,000 years ago. And for that period of time, these are people with very, very close DNA matched to our current DNA. We could actually mate with them because we have not there's no speciation at that point. We can actually have offsprings if we mated with that particular person. And at that time, religions weren't there to be seen. They might have been sort of the precursor of religion, sort of spiritual, magical, mythological thinking. But I can bet my dollar that the concern of that particular group of people is food, shelter, and safety.
Yep.
Right.
For quite some time. And your prefrontal lobe cortex, which is the third layer of your brain, had just emerged about 1.9 million years before. We lived with two layers of the brain, the ancient brain and the middle brain, for millions of years. That's emotions. For the first time, we can engage logic. And then you get... we'll take a leap all the way to maybe 10 to 12,000 years ago, and we'll discover agriculture. We settle down in communities. For the first time, safety is assured. We've got houses, or what seems to be houses. There isn't a problem with food sources. and we settle down. We've got more time. We tamed fire. We can cook our dinners, and we can tell stories. We can look up the skies and say, I wonder what that is. What do you think that is? Orion, for example, is that a god? We start engaging in these sort of things. And you probably spoke to Ed Dodge and told you about the era where the feministic god was in charge. Agriculture means fertility. It was linked with women fertility. It made sense. And that was a very peaceful era of humanity until we've discovered iron and bronze, and the machine of war started. And possession, the understanding of you owning something. Before that, everything was communal, was common. And once you have your own position, and this is mine, people would raid you to grab that position of you and become wealthy by just waging a war on you. And then suddenly the masculinity has taken over. We get the male god. So what people don't know, that Yahweh, and a lot of Muslims and Christians don't know, that Yahweh pre-existed Judaism. Mm-hmm. He was actually there. He was a Canaanite god. He was an ancient god, and he had a wife. You've spoke to Ed, and Ashra was his wife. Yeah. This was a god, actually a demigod, a small god on the back of El, the chief god, and he has adopted Israel to be their god. And that's why you get a reference always that Elohim, there are many gods, and the four commandments of the Old Testaments are all about don't make a statue of me, I'm the only god, you shouldn't take any other gods but me. There's references to trying to distinguish himself from other gods, who is not denying but saying, I'm just better. So what do you think, guys? We'll take that bit and we'll start developing it together.
Derek, you want to go first?
I'll let you go first.
Well, it's interesting that, because what you're saying is really important, especially when it comes to like the fundamentalist aspect between, not just of one of them, but between three, because they all have distinct fundamentals between the three monotheistic religions. But this when you talk about, like, when archaeology proves that Yahweh was just another idol under the pantheon of El, what that does is it actually throws a wrench in the possibility that any of these three religions could be true, because it's like, if Yahweh was just another god, like under the pantheon of El, then that would, and it predates the writings of these texts. It's like, wait a minute, we have a problem here. You understand what I'm saying? And then you get into the whole Asherah thing, and then you see how, like, the Bible, whenever it talks about wisdom, it always has a she behind it. And wisdom, her lips are pure. And the book of Proverbs says that. And then you're like, wait a minute, is there another aspect of God that somehow trickled its way down to the New Masoretic text from another source of text that go back farther? And it's like we're seeing these little skeletons of them. Dr. Kip points this out, how we see these little remnants of polytheistic literary devices in the text that survive till to this day. And what it does is it shows that there was a progression over time of these religions. These religions just didn't just pop up and given by some higher deities. Here, Moses, here's the religion. Now tell it to everybody and pass it down perfectly as it is. These religions are a result of microevolution of ideas being formed over time into what it is today. And that's why you have Christianity and Islam and then Mormonism, and then who knows what's next. That's why you get these, because times call for a new approach to these things.
I mean, simply put, to add to what you said there, let's think about what you said here about 300,000 years. We had the same hardware. We could breed with these ancestors of ours, our family. Jesus isn't on the scene. Okay. One would have to assume, well, it was by a different name, or how that happened. Why just now recently in history this has happened. In 2,000 years is a long time, but I'm saying 300,000 is nothing in comparison. So one of the things that really got my attention was this author I had on named John Knight Lunwall. He talks about orality. We know that spoken language has been something for 40, 50,000 years. We know that. How that developed evolution-wise, how the brain and how we as social creatures began to organize and construct linguistics and have orality, that's a whole nother long thing I'm not I'm not an expert in anything. I would just recommend you check out like Steven Pinker's videos on this. He's got like an hour video where he talks about how language developed. But the reason I'm going this path is to point out that imagine we're hunter-gatherers, and all of a sudden we're trying to survive. Well, how do you do that? You watch the sun rise. You know when it rises. You know when it sets. You know when the seasons are and when to plant, when to, harvest, the whole nine. You're keeping a very clear track on the stars. You're also trying to share this wisdom with your family to survive as well. You start to incorporate these into narratives. And a lot of these narratives incorporate your own stories, your own wisdom, things like that throughout time. In the ancient world, when you were oral and there was no writing, you connected dots that didn't belong. So this is what he's trying to explain. I know this is a little complicated, and I feel like this is necessary to point out what led up to everything you start seeing in the Bible, in these other literatures that we have that are written. I mean, no earlier than like 5000 BCE do we have anything written, okay? And that's pushing it. Before that, everything was orality, which meant if you, me, and Neal were hanging out in ancient world, hunter-gatherers trying to survive, we would watch when Venus would come up on the scene, and the next thing you know, green starts to cover the world. We start realizing everything comes back to life. Fertility starts to happen. You notice green in the grass and the plants, the flowers, and you're able to crop and whatnot. Now, you might already assume by that visual sign of that star Venus appearing in the sky that Venus has the power of life. Because every time Venus showed up in the sky, green, life came back. So this deity in the heavens, this star, this God, brought life to Earth. And every time it showed up, each time you can calculate it, you can predict it scientifically that this is the star that brings life. Okay, we would make that connection in the ancient world and think that star has the power to life. Now, we now know how to compartmentalize ideas now that writing is on the scene. We know how to put certain topics on certain shelves in our brain. Same hardware, different software. Now that we know how to compartmentalize, we now know Venus is just a star, and it has nothing to do with the grass growing on planet Earth, okay? We didn't know that then. So we connected everything in nature to something beyond ourselves. This is where the origin of these ideas of deities and assuming agency in things that don't have the agency we assume they do. That is the start, I think, in which religion starts to grow. We have minds. We think. We know of other humans that have minds. They think. Well, we start to just go beyond that, and other things have minds. That star is moving in a funny way. Why is it going in the opposite direction as the rest? You see where I'm going with this?
Yeah,
okay.
You said it.
So this is what happened in antiquity, I think, and it makes the most sense of why we went from nature worshiping, polytheistic. There were multiple sources, multiple powers, multiple gods,
Right?
And they had to be like us. I mean, they say, who was it that said this? If donkeys had a god, the image of their god would be an ass. Notice that their story would say that the donkey god made the ass in the image of itself. But really, it's the reverse order. We are the ones who have depicted from our own perception. Why isn't God the image of a snake or the image of a squirrel? It's always man in the image of God. Now, of course, they want to make that, it's not a physical attribute. This isn't actually giving you an idea of what he actually looks like as an image of humans. These are modern, anachronistic ways to get around the problem. And they do the same thing with God not having a body. God's outside space and time. When did that? Where is this at again? I mean, no, it's clear. All you have to do is read your Bible, but you have to do it without your modern scientific issues that keep the problem from you having to go back. You have to go back into the Bible and adjust. This is what William Lane Craig's doing with cosmology. And I got a video right now on my Patreon about this. Flat Earth, get over it. Cosmology, the heavens are a solid dome. Get over it. Except that these are just ancient men who tried their best to figure out things. They can't because they put too much weight into it, that if you find out that these are just humans trying to figure things out as well, then our magical abracadabra understanding of everything falls apart. And it destroyed me too. It destroyed what I thought was the truth. And I'm sorry that it goes on and on and on and on. I got to share the platform. You know what I mean? There's so much more.
That was great what you just said. And even to add, even a prime example of what you just said is the firmament that holds up the waters. This is in the book. This is in the text. It says the firmament holds up the waters. So you're like, wait a minute. We know that's not true, but why would they say that? But then you're Derek, like you said, you only know what's around. You could only make sense of what you already know.
Perception, and that's the best. They didn't have.
They look up and they see, okay, rain comes from up there. It's blue. It turns into a different color at night. It gets all these lights up there. So there's got to be something there holding up. There's got to be lights up there. There must be angels or something. There's some deities move. Those ones move differently than those ones. So those must be like angels. This must be just be lights or something. That's the heavens. That's what they say. That's the heavens right there, being held, and it's giving us water for our crops. Oh, we haven't got rain in a while. We must.
Hey, go sacrifice Bobby Joe. The gods will be happy, because if you sacrifice what's most important to us, then the gods will see that and go, "Hey, let's give them a crop next harvest. Last year was bad." There's so much here. Blood has life. In the ancient world, life was in the blood. If you cut out that life and give life, God will give you life. There's a lot here, man. There's so much.
And that's why, guys, I think religion is so persistent. I think it's in our genetic code. As you rightly described it, Derek, the hyperactive agency detection, it actually helped us survive at some point.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually quite useful. That's why it's so persistent. You know, you've heard the story about the rustling in the trees, and the risk management of, if you think, oh, it's just nothing but the wind, you probably get eaten. But to suggest there might be a lion and be wrong about it, that's all right. You just wasted 5 minutes of hiding, but you saved your life possibly. So the risk management at that point was quite logical. It actually made sense.
And if you just believe in God, just go ahead and believe in God, just in case you won't go to hell. It's just another step in the evolutionary process here to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, but which God? You know, like Pascal's wager got it completely wrong because his mathematics was based on the one God. Right. But he...
You know what? You know what's crazy about that is people will say, well, we don't know what happened before the Big Bang. So therefore, and they'll say, therefore Islam or therefore Christianity. And here's the thing. There could be a deist thing. This could be a deist universe. There could be some sort of I'm just saying for
no, for
the sake of argument.
Yeah, I understand.
Deism could be true, but that doesn't mean therefore you're going to be judged if you don't believe in it. It's like, we don't know the answers, and that doesn't mean we should stop and just assume something and say that if you don't pick this one, you're going to go to hellfire. It's like, no, we still need to figure things out. We still need to do science. We still need to change. We still need to progress. We don't need to stop with one book right now and end everything right now and say we figured it out. Never we should ever do that. But if you're going to say just because we don't know what happened for the Big Bang, therefore this book is right, that's a giant leap that I'm not willing to take with you.
Dude, there's so many problems to even begin. And I never thought about these till I've studied with the scholars now. I mean, the Bible teaches that the earth is flat. The whole circle of the earth. What a dumb argument, Derek. I know all of those little places I used to go to when I was an apologist in Christianity, and I'd listen to Ravi Zacharias, William Lane Craig, and I'd go and listen to all these guys and, realize, oh no, circle of the earth, that just means it's spherical. It's saying it's spherical. No, it's a disc shape on a flat plane. It has pillars. And there's, once you realize the cosmology is just ancient, you realize that, it's not that this is a stupid book. This is the other end of the spectrum of being atheist, right? People just want to say, what an idiotic book. It's stupid. I think those people exist because of the people who are out there on the side of the street with a sign talking about homosexuals will burn, God hates faggots, the whole nine. Like, those people look so ridiculous. Trust me, because I wasn't that far, but I thought those things.
I was around those people.
I thought those things. I thought this is what's going to happen. I was completely drinking the Kool-Aid. And the point is they make this book become a weapon.
Right.
So what do you do when someone's attacking you? You defend, and sometimes you attack back. Rather than just let the lunatics think what they want. Don't let it bother you, but realize this is an ancient piece of literature. This is a fossil in literature to show what we once thought, or at least these people in this region in a particular time period thought.
Yeah.
Then
And
when you do that, it's amazing.
And now we know better now. Correlation does not mean causation. I mean, back in the day, things correlated, and that means it caused this. Now we know better. Correlation does not mean causation. One of the comments here, I mean, being a science geek, the multiverse wouldn't make sense without God. Even if the religions are man-made, because who wrote the first movie? Or is it the multiverse eternally creating itself? Well, and this is where you're not supposed to be trying to learn cosmology from religion or philosophy. There is a standalone theory called superstrength theory, or M theory, and it actually suggests that if the multiverse is a reality, it actually necessarily is eternal and it's self-sustained. It does not need a first cause. It sustains itself. So basically, existence always existed. You know, if you want the eternal thing, invoke an Occam razor. You don't need to go a step beyond. Existence is always been around. Nothingness has never been a thing. Because if nothingness is a thing, then it's no longer nothing.
Yeah, we can't fathom. We can't fathom that, being creatures who were born, who live, and will die. We just can't. We can't wrap our heads around being in this and having that. It's just like a shell shock when you actually try to think about it.
Yeah. Again, another misconception of science. Yes, the Big Bang is theoretical, but that's the highest claim of science. If there is a theory that explains the facts, it's not like a theory as in a point of view. A theory in science means it's the highest possible confidence and trust. Yeah. It's not a hypothesis. It's a theory, and a scientific theory is the highest, something that explains a fact.
And that's the funny part, is like they'll point to that and say it's just a theory. Well, it's like, okay, it's a scientific theory, first of all, and yes, it's a fact. And third of all, like creationism, I don't even think you can consider that a hypothesis anymore. It's just myth. I mean, seriously, right?
That is, that's absolutely, like, what evidence would you give?
Yeah, you can't. So
God faked the age of the fossils that are way older than the age of the Earth. Like in the endless going on and on.
And that's why I don't try to put people down and say you're dumb for believing that. But it's like I'll talk about myself. I don't talk about other people. Myself, the more I immerse myself in learning things that I don't, and going to experts and admitting that I don't know things, the more I realize that it's not even that I don't think it's true anymore. It's it can't be true anymore. It just can't work with the set of science, the set of mathematics, set of history, historical method. All those things play into this. You know what I mean?
To use what you just said there, Neal, and I'm sure we all in some sense would understand this. Maybe you don't. For me, I wasn't actually wanting to hear the other side.
Right, exactly.
I wanted my side to be true. I wanted my God to be right. I mean, everyone wants to be right. Who wants to be wrong? But I wanted that to be true and ignored. I wanted to go out of my way to prove my position was true. And at any cost. That's what apologists literally do. That is their entire thing. There's no way, here I'm giving you the actual apologist in the mind, in my experience. There's no way that this experience that I had, that this subjective, powerful moment that I've had attached to the concept of Christianity can be wrong. And I'm going to spend my lifetime validating that experience with this concept. That's my whole thing. And I will go and find very sophisticated gymnastics to do so. And what ended up happening is I eventually hit a point where I was dying of drug addiction and was actually crippled in my mind. I said, okay, this isn't working. And I needed to look and be honest and say, man, I don't know anything. I felt like a Socrates moment, if you will, where I just said, man, I know that I know nothing. And that's when I began to learn. And what I began to do is listen to the other side and weigh out the options and realize this actually makes so much more sense, since I don't have to validate my experience. I don't have to act like man, that experience is about Jesus. So I need to protect Jesus because Jesus is the truth. I didn't have to validate that anymore.
And you and the advantage that like apologists and pastors and rabbis and whatever, the advantage that they have is that their subjects that they're speaking to have that emotional attachment. They want to hear what they want to hear. So they can play, you can have those mental gymnastics games, and it doesn't matter because the person that you're talking to in the crowd while you're
wants it to be true.
They want you to tell them what they want to hear. And that's the problem. That's what it is.
And the other thing is now through sciences like neurology and understanding the brain, we know that the brain is quite deceitful. What we see is most of the time is not what really is represented on the outside. Colors do not exist objectively. They're subjective. This is how our brain do the indexing so we can memorize things. There's no such thing as red. That's what we'll perceive it to be red because of the way light reflects on things and absorbs every other color, but not the red, and that's why you see the color red. Also, we understand that the brain and the consciousness is like a computer interface. It's a desktop. I think Daniel Dennett put it that way. Free will is an illusion. You think you've got it, but it's a very good illusion to have. If your brain can actually see the data as it is, you'll probably do 2 or 3 things in your day. The indexing that happens in the brain and completing and filling in the gaps in incomplete pictures will give you an approximate picture of reality, but it's not the true reality. And it's a very, very handy way to absorb a lot of data and to be able to do multiple things throughout the day. But we know our brain does not perceive things the way they really are. So therefore, how can you trust your brain? And that's why we have the scientific method. It's a method that transcends your subjective experience and puts it into an objective area where you can have falsification, we can have verification, peer reviews, all that sort of thing that will neutralize your subjective experience, which is lovely because, again, we're not trying to demonize subjective experience. They're beautiful in terms of art. They're needed. It's our human nature. But when it comes to reality, when you are trying to make a decision on something, that's why you'll see yourself before buying a second-hand car. You'll bring it to a garage or ask an expert friend of yours on cars. Can you please come and have a look? We know that. We do that practically in life. But when it comes to religion, because of that cloud of faith and emotions, overwhelming of emotions, we protect that feeling. We say, well, I feel good. Who are you to tell me? Well, I've experienced Jesus. He comes to me. He speaks to me. And that's why it's very overwhelming. It's very difficult to get out of.
Yeah, and usually we're not taking our religion to the nearest critic who's a skeptic who can poke absolute holes in it. No, we're looking, hey, pastor, help me out. This guy's saying this about this passage. How do I deal with it? Let me look Michael Heiser up. Let me look William Lane Craig up. Let me look James White up. Let me look up all these apologists who found ways to articulate arguments to help validate the faith. And if it's Muslims, they do the same thing with their apologists. Whoever it might be. Jews do it with their rabbis, and they just go to rabbis and find ways to do it as well. So they're all validating it rather than critically analyzing it. At the end of the day, like Neal said earlier, there could be a deity, there could be a God, there could be a source, there could be a power, there could be something. I don't know. I mean, there could be. I'm not saying that there is. I'm not convinced that there is, but there could be. At the end of the day, though, there's some ways to really test out the biblical things and say, all right, and I think that you could prove that this is definitely not God. Okay. This is a God in the Bronze Age, made in the image of the people that were living in that time period. Very hard to get that this is a God living outside space and time. You have to make words not mean what they mean because they're anthropomorphic and they're not literal, and it has to be vague. Well, God was jealous. Well, he's not really jealous. He doesn't have those emotions. He knows the past and the future and all things, yet he still wants everyone to be saved, even though he knew everyone was going to go to hell. And, there's just so many things that you go, what? You just got to stop for a moment and honestly go, I'm a human. Let me stop doing what I've been doing to validate this and slowly take my time poking into seeing if I'm wrong. Don't do it overnight. I did not deconvert overnight, and I don't even care if people ultimately deconvert. I want to mature people in their positions. I want people to stop being anti-scientific because they have to hold on to their Bible. And I say that like, look at what flat Earth is right now, guys. This started from, I don't know with a certainty, but I've been having emails over and over and over from people who are saying, let me on. I'll prove to you the earth is flat. I have 200 passages. Now they don't know I'm maybe an atheist. I'm like, why are you emailing me this? But I'll prove to you the earth is flat because I have 200 passages to show you in the Bible that the cosmology in the Bible is flat. This guy believes his Bible. Therefore, this guy believes the earth is flat. That's his conclusion. And I'm saying to myself, damn, he took that pretty literal. At the end of the day, though, you have guys who go, no, the earth is round. We're willing to accept theistic evolution, but God breathed his pneuma, his wind, his spirit into this hominid named Adam at some point 6,000 years ago, even though his family line has been without a pneuma for 300,000 or more years before that. You know, they're finding ways to keep science and do that. I'd rather that, even though I still poke at the hornet's nest, I'd rather that than people thinking the earth is flat and that you're injecting metals with all sorts of crazy stuff with the vaccines and they're tracking us and trying to depopulate us and all of that.
I agree. I mean, the flat earth thing, there are two things you can do quite easily. Binoculars, just a pair of binoculars and stand on a beach close to an ocean and see a ship hiding into the horizon. You will see only the top, the sail, and you won't see the bottom. If the earth is flat, you should be able to see the ship only getting smaller and smaller and smaller, but fully visible, fully intact. The fact that the bottom disappears and you can only see the sail, that's the curvature of earth. So that's one. You can do that with a pair of binoculars. You can do that yourself. The second thing, and that's a bit more complicated, but it's definitive. The only shape that will show around the lunar eclipse. This is the shadow of the earth. This is the time when the sun is in here, earth is in between, and the moon is in the other side. And the sun is casting its light onto the moon, but through earth. And you see the shadow of the earth onto the moon. And it doesn't matter which angle. The only shape in geometry that can show a circle onto the moon, doesn't matter which angle you're at, it has to be a sphere. That's the only shape that's basic geometry. So it's completely objectively sort of defined. It is you can't really debate that. Don't debate flat earther because it has been objectively verified. There's no point.
And you know what's funny about that is that the people knew the earth was round a long time ago, even going back to the ancient Greeks. I had Richard Carrier on my show who wrote a book about the history of science. So he knows the back of his hand. And he's telling me that even as science got progressively better and scientists knew that the earth was round, the only people that held on to the flat earth was theists, was Christians and other religious people that thought because their textbook told them that. So there was actually, it went from people knew the earth was round, but there was still a lot of people in the general population, uneducated, that said, no, the earth's flat, it's in the Bible, to then slowly getting smaller and smaller and smaller to the point where the only people left that thought the earth was flat was just theists. And everyone else was already just like, yeah, the earth's round. And then eventually it's like, it still trickles into today. That's the crazy part. And it's like every flat earther I know has some sort of religious belief.
Hey, I just want to make a comment. Converse Contender, and at some point we'll probably definitely be hanging out and chatting, I'm sure. He's a Christian apologist, and he says Christian apologist just goes to scholars to try and justify their biases. Don't you guys have scholars from the other side to back your views? The argument should be that all that matters. I guess you could say there's some truth to that. However, what I find with Christian apologists, and I'll give you an example by my recent encounters with a Christian scholar, Dale C. Allison Jr., and he's a legit Christian. I don't know if an apologist would call him that. That's the sad part about a lot of apologists out there, but some would. I think Mike Lacona would agree with me. William Lane Craig would agree with me. At the end of the day, though, I ask him about contradictions, mythological legends, if you could call them that, in the Gospels. Are these there? Yes, he says, without a doubt. He says some people have just not hit enlightenment. They just haven't hit that enlightenment. And so I'm talking about your comment. So whether you're an apologist or not, I don't know. We haven't talked but once, I think, ever on like a stream. But Dale Allison Jr., he's like, yes, I went to Christians, by the way, Christian scholars, and I'm going to be interviewing more Christian scholars this year. However, they're not apologists. They're not apologists. So I don't, it sounds like you're kind of defensive for apologists, whether you are or aren't an apologist. It sounds like you're defensive in some way for them. I was one, in the sense that I was under a guy named Thomas McCuddy, who was, if you will, a disciple of Norman Geisler, who worked with Ravi Zacharias and all these other guys and was close. I met Frank Turek and was there. Who's the author of 7 Days? That mathematician, John
Lennox.
John Lennox. I met him in person here in North Carolina. All of these things. The whole operation is to defend and prove it's true, it's valid, there's no contradictions. That's the whole goal. And when I ask someone like Dale Allison Jr., who point blank honestly says, yeah, there's contradictions, and some Christians just haven't come out of the Enlightenment. And then I watch Christians spend countless hours. And I'm talking about apologists, not all Christians. So if you're not this Christian, don't put yourself in the basket. But if you're one that acknowledges contradictions, cool. Why is there endless apologetics to try and do the opposite and say that there are none, and do everything they can to keep this really house of cards concept of the Bible true? And it's not true. And I'm trying to point that out. Whether one wants to remain a Christian at the end of the day, that's a different thing. But yes, I do go out of my way to do that. But I also, when I interview these other scholars that are skeptical and critical, I've asked them, hey, is this a contradiction? What about this or that? They will admittedly say, I don't really think that's a strong contradiction. I would go over here. If we're looking for a contradiction, this seems to be more clear. That's not a really good argument of a contradiction. That actually might work really well. I've done this with Dr. Bob. I'll give you one example. Dr. Price, one of the most critical, skeptical, mythicist scholars out there. And I asked him, I said, Dr. Price, why in Matthew chapter 27 or 28 were they doubting, and they were in the presence of the risen Lord on the mountain Galilee?
Right.
And it says they worshiped him, but some doubted. Doubted what? That's the risen Christ? What are they seeing? And this is what I told him. He goes, no, you don't understand. In the Greek, that's not what it's saying. So I wouldn't use it as an argument. And he was trying to point out there's this doubting motif, but Jesus corrects it. And he if you will, like the doubting Thomas tradition, that there's this idea that they were doubting early on, and that the Lord actually goes and makes them not doubt anymore. So this is a hint at this tradition or something like that. I didn't understand that. So he was actually defending the idea, and I was actually trying to say, this sounds like it actually pokes a bigger hole. Like, how can you be standing right in front of the risen Christ and be worshiping him, or some of them maybe are worshiping him and the others are doubting, or they're all worshiping him and some are still doubting? That's what I was trying to get at. And he tried to kind of protect and say, no. So I don't hear apologist Christians doing that. What I hear them doing more often than not is, there's no problems. This is inerrant. This is God's holy word. Everyone else is wrong. I'm right. That's where I came out of. And saw it.
This is interesting, Derek, because unlike Judaism and Islam, where you're very assured of your faith and you cannot doubt it, Christianity is actually quite sophisticated in some areas. And I agree with Dr. Price there. Christianity is trying to contain doubt by including it, by saying, hey, it's all right to doubt, but we'll got you. We'll comfort you. We will make you feel. Will bring you back to the fold again, but it's all right to doubt. And it happened with Thomas. It happened in Matthew, as you said. And Christianity is clever that way. It's kind of new that it's within the human nature that people will eventually doubt at some point in their life, and you can make them feel so bad about it, and then you end up losing them altogether, or bring them back into the fold. It's very clever from Christianity, I think. I want to go back to, because I think we're going to have to talk about Yahweh, Jesus, and Allah. So we want to sort of go back into the subjects. But this particular comment, and you brought Frank Turek, so he's the guy infamous for what is your source of morality, sort of thing. And here we're. This proposition is still talking about science, whether it's the ocean of facts, the sea of facts, but we need a story. We're humans. We need a conversation. We need some interesting stories where we can gather around fire and have marshmallow and tell each other good stories. And religion can provide that. But do you agree that morality has evolved, or is religion is the source of morality, or has it had monopoly on it
No.
over time? And does it actually say anything moral? I mean, there are. I mean, I can see a lot of immoral
Yeah.
stuff in religion.
It
So what
has
do you?
good and bad.
Yes.
I mean, let's be honest. Someone asked me, I'm going to, this is going to bat, right, for Christianity, and then I'll shut up. I want to let Neal, I'm sorry, I'm rambling over here.
It's good, man. I'm enjoying this.
One person asked me, what did Christianity teach you that you've never known, like you never learned? And I said, well, it's taught me a philosophy that I think is very good. And that is, it can be good, at least, is to try and love your enemies or try to be kind when people are doing wrong to you. And let me tell you why I think that philosophy is a very good one. You don't really learn that in nature. It's eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. That seems more nature. That seems more realistic. That is what the natural world would hand you. This philosophy asks you to rise above. And the reason why it's a little more complex and interesting is it's asking you to show empathy, sympathize with your enemies. And from my experience, I have to paint this picture real quick just to tell you why. When I was a drug addict, I was seriously struggling, stealing, lying, doing all of these things to try and keep my habit going. I was stealing from my family. I did a lot of stealing. I was a thief while I was on my drugs because I had to keep my habit going. The whole world around me looked at me like I was an absolute POS, piece of I mean, I was worthless to them. They thought, you know what, overdose and die, some of them. Like, they didn't give a crap about me. I'm just a drug addict. I'm nothing. Neal knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening is I got clean, and I actually successfully rose from my grave, if you could. I resurrected, right? I came back. And when I came back, I realized that I didn't really have control. The chemical, the drug, and it had control. My frontal lobar cortex was misfiring to my midbrain. I was not making proper, normal decisions. I was trapped. And once I escaped, and I started to do good in society and becoming a normal citizen again with a felony charge that I got while in active addiction to become a normal human being and do the right thing, I actually realized how many more sick people there are out there who are addicted to drugs, who don't mean to be doing the things they're doing. They're stuck.
Right.
And I know exactly what it's like to kind of wake up after being in a drug addiction for many years and think that was a nightmare that I was stuck in. Well, once you've lived it, and you don't want to be the one who dies, and you realize you're really not a bad person, but you've done bad things that you can change, you want the best for them. So that philosophy taught me sometimes the people who are your enemies right now, if you show them empathy and have patience, maybe they're going through something. Maybe they aren't in their right head, and maybe one day they'll come around and realize, hey, I'm sorry. You know, I do care about you, and I shouldn't have said that to you, or whatever it might be. You might change them in some way. That philosophy was something I learned out of Christianity. Now, did that originate in Christianity, or did that come from previous philosophers in Stoicism and going into, you know, the various Greek philosophers? That might have already existed to some degree. It's still interesting.
I think morality has been with us from day one. It had to be. If we did not have what is morality? When you define morality, what is morality other than the rules of conduct that you author as a group of people to say, this is how we're going to deal with each other. It doesn't matter what that is. And it's for the benefit of the group and eventually the individual as well. You know, you try to do that balancing act between individual and groups. And it can vary from society to society, culture to culture. But if we did not have that, Moses, for example, if we only knew not to kill after the revelation of the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, why did Moses then flee after killing the Egyptian?
Right.
He knew something was wrong. Obviously, the Egyptians had a punishment for that sort of thing. It was not okay to kill. So it didn't need God to tell us that. We knew that already.
And I think another thing to point out is that there is an evolution to it as well. As like, I think it comes from our experiences as a collective. I think we have a morality based on our life, based on our knowledge, based on our understanding and education. But we also have to agree on things too as a society. That's why we have constitutional republics. That's why we have democracy. But long story short, if you look at the law codes going back to the Sumerians to now. So, for example, the Ur-Nammu law code This predates Hammurabi. This is one of the oldest law codes we know of. This talks about throwing people into the water from a cliff. If they survive, they're innocent because God made them survive. So you could see how that law code wasn't so good. And then you get to Hammurabi's law code where it's like, okay, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, but your slave, you could beat him if you want. And it's like, okay, that wasn't so good, but it's better than the one before that. You keep going a little bit, you get to the Bible, you get to Deuteronomy, you get to Numbers. It says, okay, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth is still there, but it's like, oh, maybe you should treat your slaves a little bit better. But slavery's still there. So it's like, okay, we're still not so good, but we're getting better and better. Then you get to the New Testament. And that's like love your neighbor. And not only just New Testament, but you look in the Buddhist tradition, Confucius talking about treat people how you want to be treated. You see the global understanding of this, treat people how you want to be treated. So it pops up in the world. But so the point I'm making is now all of a sudden you get to the world today, we have the Enlightenment pop up in the 18th century. And now all of a sudden we have constitutional republics. We got democracy. I mean, these things happen in ancient Greece, but we're bringing them back. We're getting away from the whole monarchy thing. We're getting away from totalitarian rule, church theocracy. You can see a progression from human evolution. Yeah. I guess it's microevolution, but it's still there. And so that's why I say our experience is what leads to morality.
Micro is macro. It's just over a different period of time. That's all it is. It's just time, and of course, time will ends up changing as our good friend Guts at Gibbon would talk about. There's a development that changes genome wise over a period of time, and once it's long, that time and distance, we wouldn't be able to in probably 200,000 years repopulate with our ancestors from 300,000 years from now, right ago. So 500,000 years, we may not be able to repopulate genome-wise. We might be too distant. So it's just something that to keep in mind. But with what you're saying about morality, even women's rights. And what does religion do? And I'm not talking about all, but it is very patriarchal. The Abrahamic faiths are extremely patriarchal. And it may not just be that. There's probably some Eastern patriarchal stuff. And that might be embedded in nature. Think about it. How wrong would it be that the man being stronger, bigger, faster is the aggressor, hunter, gatherer, okay? The women at home take care of the kids. This is totally natural. But in a world where it doesn't require you to be this monster of a beast, hairy man going out with an arrow and a spear to go kill your food in order to feed your family, do we need to still have that as our demanded code in which we live? Do we have to have a patriarchal society in a world where it's like that? This is where, Islam, the way the women are in Islam, you can have up to 4 wives. Why can't she have up to 4 husbands? This is ridiculous. What's the deal with that? Why is that not allowed? I mean, no, this is the way that it was made. God did it. You just ask a Muslim, they'll tell you. Why aren't women having the same rights that men do and have multiple husbands? Well, they weren't created that way. Or, there's always some,
Derek, there's something called sexual dimorphism, and it is the study of how the differences between males and females within the species. Humans are actually one of the most similar between the sexes, between male and female, even physically. There are animals that the male is like 3-4 times as big as the female.
Right.
But for male and females have always been so close. We're just it's a human construct that we're trying to think that. But a female can be as strong as a man, and sometimes even stronger, because I think we will pass out if we're trying to give birth to a child.
It's just, all I'm saying is it's a different kind of thing when you're surviving. Typically, I'm not saying there weren't women with spears and bows. There were women in battles. You can go read about the wars. Complete women, like the whole army were women fighting against. But the point I'm making is the norm would be the man is probably out there fighting, killing, fishing, whatever, maybe women too. But I'm just making the point that they're coming home and the women are taking care of protecting the kids at home. At the end of the day, in a society we live in today where we are past the Enlightenment, food is at the local grocery store. I don't need to take a knife to my neighbor's throat and say, hand me over your property. People still do this crap. But the point is, you don't need to do that. This is where women's rights start to come in. They can vote. They have a say in matters. And, people abuse it no matter what you are, where you are from, and things like that happens. But that's not an excuse to somehow take away people's rights.
Yeah.
And we're in a much better place now than we ever were.
And people think that, it's like a fight between the sexes. As a matter of fact, it's a fight for humanity. You're shooting yourself in the foot if you sort of disable half of the universe, half of the world. We're always 49 to 51, 50 to 50, male female, and if 50% of humanity is sort of disabled, you're talking about creative power, productive power. We're going to need all the help we need. With the challenges coming for us. Now, back to Yahweh. Obviously,
we never even did this yet.
I know. But we'll try to concentrate on this dude. Okay, he's distinguished. He's very dominant. He's a father figure.
Yeah.
He's the aloof. He's the typical baby boomer father figure, the aloof dude who is okay. He puts food on the table. He does not want to give you a hug as a child. He's the dad. You respect your dad. You do as you're told. But deep down, he loves you, but in his own certain way.
Right.
And he's always got your interest at heart, even though he wants to kill you most of the time. But that's for your own good. How do you see? How do you see the psychology of this Yahweh guy?
Oh,
It's an abusive it's an abusive relationship and I think that's what made it stick. If you think about it, all the other pagan religions didn't really. I mean, they did actually. Zeus was like raping women and stuff. But to make the long story short, this Yahweh is supposed to be. We're talking about morality, for example. Whatever it says that he did, you have to accept it because it's Yahweh. He makes morality.
Yeah.
So if
he can create evil.
If he wants Joshua to go sack the Canaanites, he's allowed to do that. They're allowed to do whatever they want. And we have to accept it. And that creates a problem. And then people are like, well, that's ridiculous. No one's still saying that. Oh, really? Go watch the debate between Lawrence Krauss and William Lane Craig. William Lane Craig literally stated, yeah, well, it's God. He can do what he wants. If he wants to sack the Canaanites, he can sack the Canaanites. This was in 2019, this debate. So this is still the ideas that are flown around there.
I do want to say the psychology. I used to beat myself up and wonder why I repeated certain things that come totally natural, right? They want you to hate your flesh, literally, to hate what is totally normal and natural with you as a human. For me, I'm a guy. I'm an alpha male, just in my nature, inherited. It's just how I am. My father was an alpha male. He was a Green Beret in the Special Forces, this, that. But I was always that way, and I'd see women, and I like what I see. I'm a human, and it's pluck that eye out. I'm skipping ahead a little to Christianity here. Pluck that eye out if it causes you to stumble. It's better that your eyeball is cast into the fire than your whole body. Okay. Now, people get around finding, it's a metaphor. It's just a saying, and it might be, or it could mean what it says. And the point is that's how strict he is against sin. Sin is that idea. Well, if you look at Israel, man, poor Israel and their history, if this has any real serious kernel of historicity, over and over, they're dominated, they're controlled. In one situation, one of the people didn't keep the Sabbath and went and collected the sticks and was put to death for this because they were collecting sticks on the day of rest. They're not supposed to do that. This is how serious they are. Well, the reason they kept on getting conquered and women raped, people burned alive, all the various cruel things that happened to them in these warlike situations is because they weren't obedient to Yahweh. They weren't obedient to God. Their daddy, their father, who supposedly loves them. And the best analogy I can give, honestly, and this is not straw manning it, this is not pretending it, this is not beating around the bush. This is like my son watching pornography in the bedroom, as an example, or something where I ask him to clean up his bedroom. Let's use that as an example. He does not do what I tell him to do. And I warned him he's going to get a punishment if he does. And I go and I open the front door and scream at a local mob that's running by and their weapons in hands and everything. And I said, my son did not obey me. Get over here and kill him. Okay. Now, today you would look at me and say, you nut job. Are you kidding me? What are you thinking? That's your child. Like, there's something, maybe he needs some coaching. Maybe he needs some affection. Maybe make him feel like this is something he really wants to do all the time. I don't know. I'm just saying, you're God. You should know this. no, let's open the door and let's have these invaders come and destroy us because you didn't obey everything down to the jot and tittle, or you didn't obey my word. And that the Israelites were so ingrained in this ideology, or at least it seems, at least the priests were, the elites who understood this literature, were blaming themselves for what God was doing to them. It's like the beaten wife who's completely beat up, black and blue, by her husband every time you turn around, and she's blaming herself for why he punches her. And it's her fault.
Right.
And that is the ideology, but people don't realize that's the ideology. They don't even take the time to think that is the kind of relationship it looks like from people who actually are looking at this and never were that emotion, connect with the concept. This is truth. I have to have this is true. Once you're out of the box, you look in, you hear people like these new atheists that come on who are screaming, going, no, this is vile. This is not good. And they're yelling it, and you're going, something's wrong with him. He's got a demon or something. No, he's looking at it objectively, like he would look at the beaten wife or the father telling his son, you're going to die because you didn't listen to what I said. That's what the story looks like. So anyway, that's my analogy.
No, but the hint from the very beginning, did Adam ever have a choice? If Jesus was co-eternal with God, and he must have, he was going to be crucified at some point, I think Adam was set up. There was a setup here. He had to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It was inevitable. It must have it must happen.
And it's interesting that Islam recognizes this, and instead of making Adam the one who creates sin, he makes Satan. They changed the story and said instead of Adam and Eve eating from the apple, it's Satan refuses to bow to Adam, who is a perfect human being. So Satan comes into the world, gets kicked out of heaven, comes here and creates the evil world. Or that's how evil comes into the world. So it's interesting that we have the same mythos with a different logo, emphasis, different philosophy injected into it based off of what they're trying to do and how they're trying to run their civilization or whatever.
There are subtle differences, even subtle interpretations within the story. Depends on what type of Christianity you subscribe to. But the one thing that really stood out for me is from the very beginning, this God is very coercive. The crime of eating from a tree that you were not supposed to be eating from, and the punishment. Is we're talking about the banishment from the Garden of Eden, both Adam and Eve. By the way, the serpent, according to the Judaic sort of interpretation, was never Lucifer. Lucifer actually never entered the scene until the very late Judaism, and when he was sort of entered,
Lucifer he was not even in Judaism. You're talking about Satan.
Yeah, it was the adversary.
Yeah, because the word Lucifer doesn't come into a Bible until 100 AD in the Latin Bible.
Yes.
So Lucifer is a Greco-Roman deity. Most people don't know that. Lucifer is in Ovid's Metamorphoses. He's the god of light. So he just shows up in the Latin Bible in 400 AD in Jerome's Bible. Like, Lucifer, he fell. How have you fallen in Isaiah? So it confuses that. Everything just gets all mixed up and confused. But your point's still.
Well, that's another stream altogether. The evolution of Satan, because Satan has his own evolution, almost parallel to God. It's crazy. They're
so right. That could be
and you can see it obviously in the book of Job. The pinnacle of Lucifer, and then in Islam he's a completely different guy. But that type of punishment, and then the curse of God on humanity, and how the sin is going to be inherited in the offspring of humanity. And then I think we can transfer it so that particular aloof dude, God, father figure, who's very coercive, very harsh. Then Jesus had to come to atone for that original sin.
Oh, by the way, I must add, as you're getting into Jesus, I got to say this up front for those who think we're atheist or critical or skeptic or agnostic or whatever. This is not our creation. We didn't come up with this. Let me tell you why. Early Christians saw the God of the Hebrew Bible this way. They weren't atheists. I mean, yeah, sure, Rome called them atheists because they didn't have visuals, idols of their deity. So if you didn't have an image of your God, they would say you have no God.
Oh,
so
yeah.
called them atheists.
Socrates was killed for atheism. That was
right.
His change.
But I'm saying Christians were accused of being atheists because they didn't have an image, just like Jews did not have an image of their deity. They were called atheists as a polemic. It was a negative word. But the bottom line I'm trying to get at is I'm not making this up. So if we get into Christianity, we start talking about the God of the Hebrew Bible and this whole thing, there is a reason that people like Marcion came on the scene and said that God is totally evil. Like there were some people like Valentinius who said he's a pure just God and he's nothing but justice, which meant he's going to be cruel. He's going to stick with the rule and that's it. And then there's people like Marcion who said a God who does this, a God who does that, and he's like calling out things is an evil God. That is an evil God. And he said, there's no way the God of Jesus is the God of the Hebrew Bible. It's a different God. And then there were other reasons why he made his arguments. But
I mean, how can he be a just God? And from the word go, he has his own favorite people. It's like you create all humanity and he's like, I don't care about the rest of humanity, but you're my chosen people. You're it makes no sense. And my prophets can only come from a certain covenant.
Right. It's like whatever happened to Noah being chosen. All of a sudden Noah has kids. Then a couple generations later, forget about all those kids. Abraham, I chose you now. It's like then Abraham has a bunch of kids. And then what happened to his descendants? Who cares? Now I'm gonna pick Jacob. And it's like he keeps doing it, and then eventually you get Israel. But like, what happened in between, right? It's the same thing, right? But it's
a story.
Right.
At the end of the day, these are stories, and a lot of them are connecting certain nations. These are nations, a national, probably political connection between saying, oh, you're so-and-so. Oh, well, we're connected. Abraham's our dad, especially if you're in Babylon. That's why he comes from Ur of Chaldees. There's a reason you have him come from a place of ancient Babylonian descent because you're in Babylon probably writing this and you're wanting to connect. That's a whole nother critical stuff that you're not going to hear Christian apologists ever say. But the point is, that is stuff that we look at. And I'm saying, looking at the narrative, the story, he puts him in a garden. He cannot be if he's all knowing, I don't see how, because then he purposely put him in a garden where he knows the serpent's at, where he purposely knows they're going to eat this tree so that he leaves them alone so they can do it. So then he can come in and go, where are you? Which I take that to mean what it says. He doesn't know where he's at. But I used to believe this was God's way of saying, Adam, I know you're right there around there in that bush. Come on out. Where are you, Adam? I don't know where you are. No. I used to take it that way. No. Then he expels them from the garden so they can't live forever. And every single descendant from them has to die. Now we're all mortal and we all die. This is all because of eating the fruit that they should.
And this proves something that's really important because what happens in the text in Genesis 1 is, or Genesis like 2 or whatever it is, the fall. He says that he comes and says, hey, Adam, Eve, where are you? Okay, so he's not omnipresent. If he didn't know they were going to eat from the apple, then he's not omnipotent or omnipotent because omniscient because he had to have known that, right? So this brings me to this quote by Epicurus, right? I'm going to read it real quick. Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he's not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he's malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God at all?
Amen. Amen. Hallelujah.
That's a Euthyphro dilemma. It cannot be solved. It's the one thing as well in that scene. I think we're going to need to leave the Yahweh and go to Christ. Is the funny thing about you imagine I look at Adam and Eve are two kids in a house, and there's a dad, and that house is full of Christmas gifts. He's like, we're talking hundreds, and that's akin to the tree. We're talking to a garden, and it's heaven, and it's got to be millions. Got to be millions of trees. Adam would have never noticed that tree if it was not pointed out in the first place. It's like a reverse psychology. So you're the dad telling the kids,
don't
see these
that cookie over there.
Exactly. The kids will be obsessed with the cookie. There'll be nothing else you'll think about.
And why did they make the tree? Why did they make the tree to begin with? What is it going to do?
That's why Calvinist made the most sense to me when you try to harmonize everything, because it's what that's what Christians usually do. Is at least the ones I deal with, the fundamentalist or evangelical Christians, is we're harmonizing, but as Calvinists, we accepted it. Yes, God put them in there on purpose so that they would fall. And the whole reason everything, all the evil, everything you can imagine in the world happens is so God can show his mercy to some and his power and glory in this whole project. And this is where Romans 9 comes in with Paul. This is what we did as Calvinists. So we accepted it. Okay, whatever. And I was willing to accept it. That's where I was as a Calvinist.
But you know, Derek, this does not comply with the second story, because remember there was a second tree, and he said, the tree of eternal life, and he said, we gotta have to hide this one here, because if he ate from it, he'd be God just like us.
Right. Well, the argument they run to Revelation, because in there, in the new heavens and new earth, the new Jerusalem that's got the 12 foundations and the 12 gates and whatnot, in there's Jesus, right? Jesus is this new tree of life that they come and live and eat of and live forever and whatnot. So yeah, there's a lot that they would reconcile, but just getting on the Jesus here, I think it's interesting that the punishment for all of these things go on this innocent, according to the narrative, they're trying to paint it as he's innocent. And all sin is being put on this guy. And it's a human sacrifice. It's the very thing God said no to in the Hebrew Bible when Isaac was going to be stabbed. And I don't know if Islam makes it Ishmael or not, but either way,
it is Ishmael in the Quran, because that's where the Arabs from. Yeah,
it's a human sacrifice God's not okay with, but he's okay with it here.
But it's a prime example of them changing the text so it makes them more important.
Yeah, but before we move to Christ, I just want to put a background, because this background is very important. As a civilization or a nation that does not have a holy book or a god or a deity that protects them is nobody. It's no one. As a nation, to be recognized around your peers and neighbors, you got to have a holy book, and a god, a protective god. And that's why the Arabs for so long didn't have their own sort of a proper competing god, and I think this is where Allah enters the scene, because they were never given a holy book like the Jews and the Christians. So they're surrounded by all these people who are bragging about their deity, and they've got a book of their own, and they had nothing for quite some time. So they have to come up with something. Then you're acknowledged in your neighborhood as that's you're rolling with your Cadillac in the hoods and sort of thing, you're bragging. And you're staring up high.
Islam rises while Persia and Rome are battling it out. You got the Byzantine Empire and the Persians, who are Zoroastrian and probably Christian as well, and they're battling it out for control and power. And here's this rise of the Arabs, and as that rise of the Arabs is happening, you have the development of what we call Islam. It starts to happen, and they canonize. They're starting to try and right out the gate. They learned a trick or two from the Jews and the Christians on how their text and literature was, and they wanted to have what they were going to say be it as early on as they could, or at least it seems Uthman had this concept in mind. Let's collect, let's create, let's make sure we have the established text. That's how the tradition has it, at least. But the earliest sources we have are only a couple hundred years later. So this is a whole nother dilemma, and
it's always the case. Always the case. Always the case. I mean, even the Gospels. We're talking about the Gospels, and people don't know they're never written by the actual alleged writers, authors, way after the event, and in a language that wasn't the spoken or the written language of the people.
Right.
And on top of it all, the manuscripts that survive are from like the 4th century, and like people like a lot. There's a lot of Christians, and I was one of them, who were under the impression that we have a Matthew manuscript that goes back to the time of Jesus' life. Like people actually think that.
Yeah, it's crazy. And so there's the Quran, exactly the same situation for the Quran. Where
we have fragments, early stuff, P52, but that's like late 2nd century. I mean, it's like
a little tiny
tiny bits.
But either way, I get what you're saying. There's a problem. Christianity comes out of the vein of the Hebrew Bible, period. No matter how you check it, whether it's in an opposition to, or whether it's in some collaborative effort, this God somehow shows up in the New Testament whether it's good or bad, either way.
So let's get into Christ. So we've established Yahweh, his personality, and the original sin, which is going to give rise to the reason why Jesus sort of was born, because he's on a mission. Jesus was on a mission. Within 33 years, he's going to achieve that mission. But what we see is a departure. Complete departure. I think Yahweh and Allah are very similar. You know, they're Bedouin nomadic type of gods. They're in your face. They're black and white. But then Jesus comes and he talks in analogies and parables and all sort of, you know, wisdom. He's quite meek, not necessarily benevolent, because I'm going to show issues. I've actually showed on my channel a couple of weeks ago how Christianity actually can be more dangerous than Islam and Judaism combined, because passive aggressive and guilt association is horrible. You can get away from an abusive dad, like a physical abusive dad, quite easily after a while, but then the one who told you that you're never good enough, you're never going to be able to be your own man, is the worst of all dads.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's a different kind of danger, I would say, if that makes sense.
And not only that, people point to Islam as being like, oh, Islam, they make their women cover their faces. But it's like, okay, well, the Christian text, if you want to get fundamental for a second, Timothy, I think it's First Timothy, says that women should cover their heads, and if they don't, they're discrimination, or they're what do they say? It's like a disgust or something like that to the church, or like just you know what I'm saying.
I was in a Presbyterian I was a member of the Presbyterian PCA church toward the end of my run within Christianity, and the women wore white headscarves covering their head inside of church. Even when we rented out a building to go and have church in, they wore them inside there. It was like we were in a branch, if you will, off of Puritanism. Right. That's what we came out of. So yeah, you want to get biblical, there you go.
And the reason why I bring that up is because a lot of American Christians, for example, and this might be happening in other countries too, but from my experience, a lot of American Christians, Baptists and evangelicals will talk about this being like the reason why the West is all freedom based and liberty based, because this is Christian America. But it's like, that's not where we get that from. We get those from Enlightenment ideals. We get that from liberal secular ideals. Not
if you look at the Eastern Church, Orthodoxy, you know, the Greeks, the Serbs, the Russians, they actually cover up. Egyptian Coptics, they cover up in church. Right. You wouldn't be able to tell them from a Muslim,
because if they don't, they're a shame. They're a shame to their husband, to their head.
That's what it was. That's the word I was thinking of.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So yeah, let's now talk about Christianity. So Jesus, completely different, you know, but there are verses in the Bible, in the Gospels, that will talk about he's not here to change the law. He's here to complete the law.
I did not come with peace. I come with a sword.
Yes, and you've been told before, and now I'm telling you so. So sometimes there's a contradiction. Are you here to change the law, or are you here to emphasize the law? Because, hey, there are contradictions in that area. Which way to go? But one thing you can tell for sure, the two different personalities. Yahweh is not Jesus.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like he's schizophrenic at times, where he talks about love your enemies and to pay to Caesar what is Caesar, and then a couple pages later he's saying, I've come with a sword, and half of you, I've come to cut half of you in half. Half of you are going to be in hell. And like, he just changes up from page to page, like different, like he's becoming Yahweh for a second and then going back to this peaceful guy for a second.
Yeah. But he had tantrums, you know, when he was 12. I think you know about his immaculate birth sort of story. Disappears for 12 years, and you have that temple. Where were you, Jesus? I was in my father's house, and having a tantrum with people selling stuff around the temple, and disappeared.
Attacking him with his little whatever.
Yeah, and then he's so nice and kind, and suddenly passes by a fig tree and curses it forever because it didn't fruit outside of season.
Well, obviously, people, you know, there's always an explanation with the fig tree representing Israel. The idea is it's even worse. Think about it, guys. Think about it. You're going, well, they're trying to make an apologetic that, nah, come on, man. It's not, he's not just cursing a fig tree because he was hungry and it wasn't giving figs. It's not producing fruit. And what does the fig tree represent? Israel. So he's cursing Israel. Okay. That is what he's doing. It's more than just a tree that produces fruit. This is, since you aren't going to produce fruit, I'm cutting you off. And people will come from the east and the west and sit at Abraham's table. That's the idea. God's done playing favorites with Israel. A new Israel of God's coming in, a new people. It's going to be the church. And that seems to be what the scholars are saying in like Matthew. I got a scholar, man, there's so many scholars. Don't get me started. I don't even want to begin. We won't even be able to stop. I don't think we could spend as much time we spent already on this episode and barely scratch the surface on New Testament stuff with what I've explored and things like that and ideas that I have. But at the end of the day, man, it's not a pretty picture, the way that you are viewing yourself. They've taken the concept that you learn in Judaism, it's our fault, and they just make it even worse. You were born like a wicked, vile creature. And Paul was the greatest sinner of them all. I mean, that idea that you're dung in the eyes of God, you know, without the Spirit of God, you're trash. And what does trash get done? It gets thrown into the fire. It burns.
And not to get too philosophical, but like Nietzsche talks about Christianity being a slave mentality religion, and he's not wrong, because literally in the epistles it'll say, my name is Jude, a slave of Christ, or Paul, a slave. They're addressing themselves in their letters as slaves of Christ, the servant of the Lord. Like they want that mentality. I'm just a sinner.
Yeah, Nietzsche called it a slave morality, and he's actually trying to argue something very simple. He said you have to first be able and strong enough to be able to forgive. When you forgive, but you are in a position of weakness, well, you're not really forgiving. That's the best you can do. It's like you're. That's what you're telling yourself to feel good about yourself. But in order to properly forgive, and I agree with him, you got to be in a strong position. And higher than the situation you're in, and say, well, I can do something, but I will choose not to.
Wow, it's interesting.
When you don't have anywhere else to go.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I'll forgive you.
Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, please. Yeah, no.
So I understand that you guys are okay to go for another 20 minutes or so. We're just going to cover Jesus quickly, and then we go to Allah. Now, Jesus is an interesting proposition because it's called the vicarious redemption, and that's a big moral issue. Is it right? First of all, is it right to inherit a sin? Adam and Eve, let's argue they made a horrible mistake, but that's them. Maybe Derek or Neal, if you're that person, you might choose differently. You might say, well, shit, that's God. I better do what he says. You would have done something differently. Well, how is it fair? And I think it's mentioned in the Bible, in the Old Testament, that up to the fourth generation, the sin will be inherited. But this is way beyond the fourth generation.
And not only does it say that, it says that no man can pay ransom for another person's sin.
Exactly. Vicarious redemption. So then, but he's no man. Only God can do that.
Yeah,
that's the gymnastics that Derek was talking about earlier. You got to play. There's an answer for everything. Otherwise, Christianity wouldn't be around.
It's the unfalsifiability, and that's why science is so nice. Because actually, there's a black and white. There is something that is right or wrong. But with religion and sometimes philosophy and wisdom, by the way, I don't like wisdom myself, because with wisdom you can prove anything and its opposite. You can say patience is a virtue, and you can say the early bird gets the worm. So through wisdom, I can prove something and its opposite. That's why it's just it's a word salad to me.
Yeah, the whole development is interesting. The idea of Jesus' sacrifice somehow atoning for sin, or it will atone for sin. That's another interesting thing. When you look in Paul has this already but not yet thing. Like, it started, but it will, like, sin will be finished when the Lord returns, which obviously never happened. And that's another problem, is it failed. But if you look at it carefully, look at Julius Caesar. These gospel authors, I am fairly certain, know the Roman Caesars. They have. I just can't imagine them not knowing this history and understanding Julius Caesar practically sacrificed himself by having the Senate come and kill him. They assassinate him, and he is deified on the spot. Okay, here he is deified on the spot. It's almost like his blood sacrifice atoned for the sin and guilt of Rome.
And then his son, adopted son, becomes titled literally on the coins, Son of God.
Now, I don't know. You can't be like, I know that's exactly this,
No.
but there are ways to potentially connect dots here and think. And, there's the philosophy of nothing greater than laying down your life for another fellow human being. You find this in the text. But most of the scholars I talk to think that the sacrifice motif, this whole Jesus's death paid for my sins, this seems to be an ad hoc after the fact that Jesus died. If there was a historical Jesus, they're now trying to find out why he died and why this matters. How is this relevant to us? So now they're finding out, he died for us. This is one of the arguments that scholars would say. So it's cognitive dissonance that starts to answer why he died. And so they start saying, well, he died so that we, can have eternal life, or that we can have our sins forgiven, etc. But that goes against much of what the Hebrew Bible does say about these things.
And I think we probably would agree that the founder of Christianity is Paul. Paul, Jesus throughout his teachings, he's talking about the Israelites, the sheep, the one that needs to come back to the fold, and and he's just talked about he's a Jewish Messiah, and he's talking to the Jewish people. Right. It's only with Paul that the Gentile, that this faith and the covenant of God has moved from the descendants of David and the Israelites to anybody who would accept Jesus as Lord and Savior, and through faith of Jesus, the new covenant, a new covenant has begun, and it's open up to the world. And suddenly, this changes the dynamics of the Abrahamic faith. It's no longer, it's an international religion. Anybody can come in and become Christian, and changes everything. So how do you see that bit? Do you? And we know that I think there are 13 letters, only 7 are actually the real letters. How do you see Paul's situation? And Paul does not talk about Jesus' miraculous birth, and he doesn't talk about Jesus quite a lot. It's actually
Joseph. There's no Joseph in Paul's letters.
Yeah. So there's a lot of missing information.
Yeah. I wouldn't say I would maybe phrase it a bit differently. I would say that Paul is picking up on this Jesus movement from previous people. So what we call modern Christianity, I guess you could say, what we start to see in the early or late first century, early second century, with Gentiles all over the place worshiping Jesus, believing in Jesus, that I would say probably did start with Paul. But people that Paul was competing with were trying to convert his audience to circumcise and convert, it seems. So to me, it seems like Paul he has a different kind of approach. It depends on how you want to view Paul. I don't even have this enigma of a character figured out yet. I don't know if he's opposed to Judaism completely, and I think he might be, or if this guy is a radical rabbi with some really liberal tendencies here by making convoluted arguments that, for example, well, Gentiles can come in and they don't need to circumcise. Well, where are you getting that from, Paul? We've always known they need to convert to become Abraham's seed. Well, I'll tell you how. Abraham was from the Ur of Chaldees. He was a Gentile in his father's house full of idols. You Gentiles, you pagans that I'm talking to over here in Corinth, you have idols. You're in a foreign land. You're not an Israelite. Okay. But
great oration, by the way. Great.
It's a slick idea. Yeah. It's very slick. And then he says even more. He says he wasn't even circumcised yet, and he was justified and righteous. And then, of course, God promises, even before he was circumcised, God promised that you'll be a blessing to all the nations. Genesis 12 and Genesis 18. So here he is in Galatians making this argument saying, you weren't circumcised. Okay. You're idol worshiping pagan. You were a Gentile. You're not an Israelite. So was Abraham, because Abraham was, and you are the same. You don't need to be circumcised to be justified, which is a really strange thing to me. Why he's doing this? Why is he so adamant on not circumcising? Galatians 5, he says, cut your whole pecker off. Okay. If you're going to start it, just cut the whole thing off. I mean, he's not happy. So either it's very hard to wrap my head around this guy.
You're going to need that for reproduction. You need more people.
Well, he doesn't care about reproduction. Paul actually is saying,
don't
burn with lust, don't marry. So he's not a pro have sex
Yeah.
and continue.
He's strange. So Paul is strange. Paul is strange. I'll give you that. He's very strange. I have not. Yeah, he's an enigma to me. I don't know. I mean, there's a couple of things about him that I'm not quite sure about, but it's been established that Paul, through is the at least the 7 authentic letters, open up that religion to humanity, and then you have Constantine and then Theodosius. These are the 2 kings. One converts to Christianity, and one makes the Christianity the religion of the Roman Empire, and that's after the 4th century, and then Christianity booms. But it still remains, and is Jesus as benevolent as he's made to be? Is he really a departure?
On where you're reading it. That's my opinion, because if you're reading a certain gospel, you might get the idea he is. This is why I love scholarship. Jesus is not, he doesn't agree with himself.
Right. In John, you get God. He's literally the God. In Mark, you just get he's the best prophet that ever lived. He's the Messiah. And then you get in Luke, it's like a little bit in between. And then Matthew is like, you get this Jewish guy, this completely Jewish Messiah.
Only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel.
Right. That's you get all these different types of Jesus depending on the gospel. And it's being it looks like it's being directed at different types of people almost.
Bart Ehrman talks about how in Mark, Jesus has an anger problem. I mean, he is angry left and right. In Luke, he's copacetic. Right. He has no problems. He is the one who has to give the Father his spirit. He's like, you know what, God, into your hands I commend my spirit. In Mark, my God, why have you forsaken me? Okay, like
then in John,
a different picture.
And John, he's pre-existing. He was there in the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh.
In Matthew,
that doesn't happen in the other 3 Gospels. That's a brand new concept.
But there's a timeline progression, guys. The older the Gospel, the Gospel of Mark, which is the oldest, supposed to be the oldest, he does not know what the hell's going on. He's just, But then John, which is the latest Bible, I think it's 95.
Yeah,
is completely in control. He knows what's going on.
He's the part of the Godhead. He's one of the pre-existing logos that was there in the beginning with God the Father.
Yeah,
they're really clear in the beginning of that gospel. Okay.
And that's a marker of a myth, isn't a marker of myth that the story gets added. You get stuff added on as time goes by.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
I
don't think anyone critical denies that. Right. I mean, we might have minutia that we dispute or whatever, but there's some clear stuff. If you take Matthew. And I'll shut up on this. We got to move on to Islam because we have very little time left.
Yes.
Matthew has Jesus say point blank in Matthew 10, verse 6, 5 and 6 in that area. He says, do not go to the Gentiles, meaning don't go in the way of the Gentiles. Do not enter any city of the Samaritans, but rather go only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, the Jews. Only go to them. And he says elsewhere, you will not have even gone through all the houses in Israel before the Son of Man comes. Matthew 15, I came only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, Matthew 15. Now, in his life, according to Matthew, during his life, not a single point of the ministry is to anyone of Samaritan origin or a Gentile. In the Gospel of John, Jesus himself walks up to a woman at the well who's a Samaritan and tells her, oh, if you knew who I was, the whole flamboyant, the whole picture. He's like, I've had 5 husbands. You've had 5 husbands, but the one you're with, all this stuff. What does he do? Him and the disciples go into the city of the Samaritans for many days. Matthew, he said, have nothing to do with these people. And then once he died at the end, then the Great Commission says, now go into the nations, now go and preach to all the Samaritans and the nations and whatnot. Go do that now. In John, it's right out the gate. He's already in a Samaritan city, convincing some woman who had multiple husbands that he is the Messiah, and that many of the Samaritans believed. You can't reconcile these. I don't care what a Christian tells you, but you cannot reconcile these issues. They are clear contradictions. So either the commission to go to these people happened after he died, or during Jesus' ministry in his life, he was doing it. You either have to neglect one for the other, but you can't have both.
Yeah. Then comes the Arab gods, Allah, or the Arabic version of Yahweh, which is an interesting one. The Arabs, descendant from Ishmael, I look at them as sort of being envious of the Jews. Looking at them, all these bloody people, they're very good with money, very good with money, and
They're smart.
And
yeah.
the Christian Romans, they're looking at them. I guess the Byzantines, who are about to be Byzantines, really pretty much. They're looking at them like, oh, well, we can have their empire if we work out. Like, there's a lot of things happening here, especially when you look at the Quran and you see like these legends popping up, like the horned one, who's clearly, in my opinion, is coming from being borrowed from the legend of Alexander the Great, being called the horned one. They both put up a wall against Gog and Magog. So that story comes in there. Then you get the 7 sleepers story. 7 sleepers in the cave. Where does this story come from? Well, it turns out in 400 AD under Theodosius, this was a legend for Christian 7 sleepers who went to sleep under a pagan rule, woke up under Christian rule. Long story short, here's what I've come to realize about this text. It's like when you go and meet a fortune teller that's a crooked fortune teller who looks you up on Facebook and gets some information about you, but you don't know they did this, and they know your grandmother loved the color red, and they're like, oh yeah, the color red is in this room right now.
I thought all fortune tellers by definition are crooked. There isn't a
right, but exactly. That's my point. So they say that somebody who loves the color red is in the room right now, and you're like, how do they know about my grandma? Well, the Eastern Roman Empire, who is in control of Egypt, Judea, Syria, and Turkey, they know these legends. They're like, I know that legend. This has to be from God. The 7 sleepers legend, I know that story. This has to be the truth. So they're throwing these stories, injecting them into the Quran, and it sells to the people. Otherwise, how do you get an empire to switch sides? You don't just a bunch of Arabs don't just take over the Eastern Roman Empire. You need people from the Eastern Roman Empire to defect to your side, which is what they did. A lot of Syrians became aligned with the Arab conquest. A lot of Egyptians aligned themselves with the Arab conquest, didn't like the Romans, and it worked. And now you have an Islamic empire.
I have a hunch, and I mean, this is where I get into the scholarship and really enjoy the critical scholars in Islam that I've been interviewing and like getting into it. Like the origin of this religion, if you will. There's this interview I did recently with Robert Hoyland. I don't know if you saw that interview or not. Amazing interview. Robert Hoyland actually pointed out that can't even crown the inside.
That actually cracked me up.
You know what, Dr. Josh? Checkmate, atheist. Oh man!
I was looking at my phone, but I just.
He's funny. I love that guy. He's sick right now, man.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I hope you get feeling better, brother.
You too.
Get well soon, mate. Get well soon.
Yeah. Just let me make it quick. The point is that non-Muslim sources are earlier in some cases, not always, but in some cases, but they all seem to agree with this idea that there was a conquest of Judea, if you will. There was a conquest of Jerusalem, and that Muhammad was alive. In some of these, it's very clear. In some of them, it's not as clear, but it seems to indicate it. And according to the tradition, Islam has Muhammad die in 632. However, according to when that conquest happened was 636. And all these extra non-Muslim sources are indicating that he was supposed to be there and that he was there conquering Jerusalem, made many trips to try and conquer it. Now, if you're a prophet after Abraham, all right, there's a reason you're going to want to conquer Jerusalem. This is clearly in your text. Joshua, one of the lead, and someone got on to me for using the word warlord. Joshua was a warlord. This guy had a sword and was ready to destroy in the name of God to take what was rightfully theirs according to their own religion and their own, ideas. But the point is they go and they're trying to conquer and the sources didn't line up. And I'm thinking to myself, why is there so much Bible? Well, they come out of the vein of the Abrahamic faiths, Christian and Judaism. Why is he Ishmael descendant though? Why is it Ishmael and not Isaac? This told me, I think, that there was much more Jewish activity in early Arabic, the Arabic times before Islam takes over, there seems to be more Judaism and Christianity involved than we think. And I don't mean Christianity necessarily like Trinitarian. I mean the ones that are cast out of the empire that are on the outskirts still surviving. Yeah. So you have Jews that are early on working with them. By the way, the Jews went with these Arabic people in conquest to take over Jerusalem. The Jews wanted it to be ruled so that the rebuilding of the temple would happen. This is in the 600s. So their whole motive is, look, the Messiah, the new temple, the whole nine. And the Arabs are not thinking this. So what happens over time is the Arabs are divorcing themselves from the Jews, but still making their lineage connect to Abraham. So they need to have a political religion that unites them under one shelter, like you talked about. But at the same time, the way that it makes the most sense that all these other references do is that they came out of Judaism and Christianity, potentially with some paganism that's out there in Arabia, but it's probably less paganism than we think.
Like the jinn, for example.
The myths,
But isn't that what we do, like in real life? Like you look for a job and you want references, yeah. So if Christianity comes across and it's like, no, we're not brand new. We're well-established organization. We are the same. We have the same God as Judaism, and we have prophecies in obviously the Isaiah 53 and 14, and all these prophecies. The Alma, and it was supposed to be the Virgin. Translated as a virgin, and we know Alma in Hebrew means a young lady, doesn't actually mean virgin.
An Alma could be a virgin, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, because in the Isaiah passage that's in, the woman is most likely not a virgin because she's married to King Ahaz. So you're good.
But there's actually a Hebrew word for a virgin. It's called batula. So it's quite ambiguous if you're going to be precise. Prophet. That's the thing. Ambiguous prophecies are there to fit. I can get you the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin, and I can get things out of context to give you some prophecies of today's world.
What gets me is they accept too much Christianity. And what I mean is why I think there's early Christianity playing a significant role. Why would you accept Jesus as one of your prophets? Why are you accepting him and a virgin birth? You're accepting this man was born of a virgin. Islam's accepted that. Well, Jews,
there is a reason. I tell you it's a very shrewd reason. This is the last installment of God's message. And if you're going to include people previously, then you can have Christians then and say, oh, well, Jesus is actually revered in Islam. It's actually I might actually change over. I'm going to subscribe to the latest edition of this faith.
In one of the Al-Sabre, I think it's called, one of the books in the Quran, it talks about there being Jesus saying, and they're playing off what happens in John. We talked about the spirit of truth. And it actually says in the Quran that Jesus was talking about him being a forerunner to Ahmad. And I guess they're trying to say that this Ahmad is connected to the spirit of truth in the book of John. So they're actually playing off of things that are in the New Testament. So you sort of need to have the New Testament for this to work, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Also, another thing I noticed too, and this is a little bit different, but sort of related, is that some of the prophets' names, Elijah,
Elias in Arabic.
Well, that name has... the name Elijah literally means God is Yahweh.
Yes. Yeah.
So your prophet's name is a different God's name, even though it's the same God. I get that. But it's like you're acknowledging that this prophet was worshiping Yahweh, and that has to be valid for all this to happen. So you have to have Judaism, then you have to have Christianity with the spirit of truth for Islam to come along and say, we're the last one. So they have to be valid. So you kind of can't go against it.
But it's still, they get it completely wrong. So they talk about the Trinity, and they talk about the Trinity, and they include Mary in the Trinity as one of the the three gods. They got it completely wrong. They get Mary mixed up, the genealogy of Mary. They confuse Moses' sister Mary with Mary the Virgin. It's crazy.
That's what I was saying. They're about them getting it wrong. Is that Ahmad has no connection to the spirit of truth. I don't even know where they got that from. But you hear Muslim apologists say that somehow the word Ahmad is actually in the text when it's not.
Yeah, look, this is why I love going to the experts on this, because, and I mean, I'm talking about expert criticals. So I'm not interested in apologists who call themselves scholars. I'm interested in scholars who aren't apologists. If you, at the end of the day, are a liberal type of Muslim, okay, cool. But I also talk to ones that aren't Muslims at all and speak to various different ones. This point you bring up makes me think, where it talks about this dark time where there's paganism all over and then Islam comes and saves the day. Well, if there is any kernel of history to that, if there's any truth, that paganism isn't what we would think of as like completely nutty out there paganism. The point is this is a polemic against Christianity, Trinitarian, or the versions that are floating around where there's Mariology. Because in this time, there is a debate going on. The coins that I showed Robert Hoyland that show the iconography and I mean, this numismatics is what they call the coinage. It's numismatics. They're showing images of the emperor and Jesus on the back. At this time, there was a debate even in Christianity, in the empire. We're talking Rome. We're not talking the Byzantine Empire, not Islam or Arabic regions. We're not even talking about over here in Persia. They were having this dispute about having images on coins, but people were doing it. And people were worshiping images with Mary or with Jesus or whatever. And they're looking like they're idols. So what is an idol? False gods. You have images of these gods. I wonder, and it's not just me. I mean, I'm talking to people like Marijn van Putten. I'm talking to people like Sean Anthony. I'm talking to people like Robert G. Hoyland. These are the four horsemen type of the whole like serious critical scholarship in the West type stuff. And they're saying they think that the early polemics are possibly these idol worshiping. They have images of these saints, Saint Jerome and Saint Justin Martyr, and these might be these gods that they're talking about.
And they had sculptures of them. I think somewhere in, like I said, I'm not an expert. Don't ever come to me for authority. This is just my opinion, and I'm wrong a lot, by the way. But I'm pretty sure in Constantinople there's like a set of 7 sculptures of 7 saints, and if you look at them, it looks like they're like gods basically. So this is probably what they're looking at. They're looking at these things and saying, we got them. Now they're the wicked ones, and we can take over this and be like the true religion. You know what I'm saying?
The funny thing about Islam, which is very kin to Judaism as well, Allah was a known pagan deity before Islam. Mm-hmm. And that might be a completely separate episode.
I think it's Allah or something like that.
Yes, so
it sounds very similar, but I don't think it's the same one.
Like
it could be.
Well, Muhammad himself, Muhammad's family name, surname, he is Muhammad bin Abdullah.
It also means the word. It's also the word for God too. But I get what you're saying.
No, the word for God is Al-Ilah. Al-Ilah. Allah is a specific name for a god, because there were some other gods competing with Allah. So there's actually evidence that Allah pre-existed Islam. Very similar to Yahweh. Very similar.
Yeah, there's actually a text that's in 1001 Nights where it says the Allah of the sea, the Allah of the air, the Allah of there's all these different Allahs. I'm like, whoa, that's interesting.
Yeah. So there's a lot of background, but there's a lot of similarities between the establishment of Islam and Judaism. I find a lot of Christianity is a different game. I think it's Hellenistic. It's got lots of Greek and Roman tones. The Islam and Judaism has got that Bedouin. It's got that sort of primitive type of God. There's a lot of similarities, but one thing about God and the God can never manifest in humanity. He's aloof. He's up in somewhere in the 7th heaven, and he will never communicate with people directly. It's got that similarity. That's why Jews and Muslim, and I think this is where the Arabs had to come up with Islam at some point. They're looking at the neighboring civilization, all with their books and deities, and the Arabs were like nobody. And it's like, well, hold on a second here. It's time. And that's why the word Ummi in Arabic, which is supposed to mean illiterate, that's Prophet Muhammad supposed to be illiterate, actually can be translated into a nation that does not have a holy book.
Right.
And
I don't know anything about it.
And you know what's interesting about all this though is that there's actually a book called The War of the Three Gods. And it's this time period in particular, Zoroastrian was big. We're forgetting about that.
Mm-hmm.
So you gotta also factor in the Zoroastrians were obsessed with purity rituals, stuff like that. Like if somebody died that couldn't be near, they had to like bring them out, or you couldn't like rip your nails off, stuff like that. Little purity things like that. And it's like you could make a case that Islam could have borrowed some of that mentality a little bit, but like that was also at play. Like that was the entire Eastern Empire, the big empire in the East. They were all Zoroastrians. You know what I mean?
I'm very mindful because Derek wanted to finish on the 2 hours, and I think this conversation is going to continue. We might have to take it onto your channels, guys, and this is going to be interesting. Maybe next time what we should do, because we tried to cram in 3 gods in one episode, and I think maybe we should.
I do. I just want to end on this note that you're right. The God of Islam that is clearly there is much more like what we find in the Hebrew Bible than what we find in the New Testament. Much more brutal. At the same time, the Muslims love to point out, they love it. They go, show me where you go kill every man, woman, and child. No, you take those women as your slaves. It's like, spare them, don't kill them. There's no direct command from Allah to go kill the women. They become your slaves. But you can kill the men, of course. It's
like that mugger that gets you in a New York alley and say your life for your wallet, and you say, okay, my wallet, and it's like, oh, that's a moral thing. That's a lot better than killing you.
Well, it's still killing. No, it's the only difference is you're not. Yeah, if you're taking the woman as the analogy, then because now she's becoming your slave, most likely a sex slave.
Yes,
with someone who killed her husband, most likely. Okay, so that's always a good thing to do, right? No, not a good thing to do, not a good idea. And I'm not trying to paint our modern morals against that. I want to point out these are times where everyone was doing this. However, if this is a universal, timeless, prophetic, what we should follow as an example, then no. I don't think it's okay. If Christians went around saying, you know what, we should start doing what Joshua did. And trust me, there are some that actually look at Joshua's conquest when we were going into the Middle East as if this is somehow a fulfillment of the Joshua conquest by Christians. No, bad move. Well, let's go out there and kill, because look at Joshua. He did it. Or look at what the prophet did, all right? Or followers of the prophet, leaders, the caliph, if you will, whatever. No. We need to learn to stop following these things from the past, learn from them, but don't repeat these things. That's the thing.
Yeah. With the Joshua thing, I want to end with this. It's every time you mention Joshua, I can't help but thinking about the betrayal of God's ignorance of how cosmology works, the way he held the sun for Joshua to complete his story, and did not understand that day and night happens because of the rotation of the earth around its own axis. And he's like, come on, God.
You really stopped the earth, but that's what they interpreted it as.
Yeah.
There's a metaphor there somewhere.
Yeah. So he stops the sun. This is so ridiculous.
That's crazy. Well, I enjoyed this thoroughly. We'll take it on some other time, maybe in one of your channels, or maybe here we'll work it out later. But thank you, folks, very much for tuning in. Hopefully, you enjoyed the conversation. You guys, one more time. In the description of the video, please subscribe to these 2 wonderful channels, high-end scholars in all disciplines, whether it's theology, philosophy, and on other topics, other interesting topics, plus 2 wonderful hosts with witty and very down-to-earth demeanor. I'm quite proud that I'm friends with you guys now. I really enjoyed the conversation.
We're glad to be your friend too.
Yeah, me too. This is awesome. Definitely do it again soon.
Thanks very much. All right, folks, we'll chat to you some other day.